Our guest today is the publisher of the Chicago Sun-Times. He also serves as Chief Operating Officer. Houlihan, Jim, I'm trying to get through this. He also serves, this is on cable, Jim. Cable? You can start it over again. Our guest today also serves as Chief Operating Officer of the Sun-Times News Group. During a time of extraordinary stress for his company, with the senior executives being indicted and accused of fraud and dealing with incredible challenges, our guest today has provided both the moral leadership and inspiration to the employees and the readership of the Sun-Times newspapers to give people confidence in the future. Our guest today has been a real superstar for the Chicago Sun-Times News Group. For that, we owe him a deep debt of gratitude. Ladies and gentlemen, John Cruickshank. John?
It's terrific to see so many friends here today. I'm also honored that so many members of the Sun-Times executive and of editorial, especially the editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, John Barron, have been able to come today. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to thank my friends Tom Roser, Paul Green, and Jay Doherty, who is, in addition to the work that he does here, is a member of the Friday Philosophy and History Book Club, which has a certain renown that it's earned over the years. Anyway, about a year ago, I began a series of luncheon meetings with our younger staff from around the company to talk about news. The Sun-Times News Group has almost 100 newspaper titles and editions in the Chicago region and just as many websites. We have approximately 2,500 full-time staff and another 500 part-timers. With the Chicago Sun-Times at the core, 7 suburban daily papers, dozens of paid weeklies and free publications, we reach more than 60% of the newspaper reading public on an average day, more than any rival, but for Sunday. News gathering and news dissemination are at the heart of our moral mission and our civic duty, and along with selling ads, are the core activities of our business. My company lunches were really just informal focus groups. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this in front of genuine market researchers, but this was my Scotch side coming through. I was gathering data on the cheap, gambling, a sandwich, and a soda and a brownie, that my guests would ignore the fact they were noshing with the boss and be candid about how they used the media. I wanted to hear young people express in their own words what interested, engaged, and delighted them. I wanted to understand how they were staying informed. And what I heard from those young saleswomen and truck drivers, paper handlers, order entry clerks, and news deskers started me on an intense 12-month study of newspaper readership and public engagement. This study has undone many of my assumptions about what's happening in the newspaper business, and this is the reason I wanted to report to you today, about some significant aspects of our democratic culture. There's no more fitting place to make my report than the City Club, the premier association for the discussion of politics and public policy in the Midwest. And no better time than today, because the issues I will raise have their place among the most serious matters of any political season. Now, as you probably heard, perhaps even through newspapers, our business is going through a period of convulsion and retraction. Circulation is sliding, and important categories of advertising are migrating to the internet. While profit margins are still quite high compared to some industries, Wall Street today believes there's limited opportunity for future growth and has discounted newspaper stock. Knight Ridder, America's second biggest newspaper company, was put up for auction because its shareholders lost faith in its management's ability to cope with change. Let me give you a couple of visuals to provide some insight into what's happening. You're in Union Station, in a waiting room, a generation ago. There are a couple of people engrossed in paperbacks. There's a Madame Defarge type clacking her knitting needles, staring at the ceiling. Right? There are a couple quietly chatting, having a smoke. And 5 other commuters are paging through copies of the afternoon newspaper. Flat. Don't worry about it. We'll ignore that. There are critics of newspapers everywhere. Flash forward to O'Hare Airport today. The older guy with the food stain on his tie is fumbling with his BlackBerry. The other gray hair is flipping rapidly through the free tabloid designed for hip young adults with short attention spans. There's one kid lost in his iPod, another playing Super Mario on his Game Boy, a couple of folks half watching the Weather Channel on one of the overhead monitors, and the other boomers and Xers are all talking on their cell phones. I ask you to take special note of 2 things from our scenes. The first is tremendous growth in personal media. And I don't mean by that just the devices that people are using. I mean, we all know you can shut out the world with a newspaper. In fact, it's actually a lot more practical than a cell phone or an iPod if you just want to rest your eyes for a couple of minutes on the couch. But a newspaper's content is a bridge from the world of private concerns to public experience. iPods and cell phones can also reach out of the private realm to the public. I mean, you can download interviews or editorials to your iPod, news files to your cell phone. But studies show that that's really not how people are using the technology. Personal media devices have become our chosen instruments of distraction. We use them to fill our time. We occupy our attention to make us feel productive or at ease while we're waiting around for something to happen. You can understand why I'm worried about these scenarios. But let me suggest why you should think about their implications too. Though they never would have thought about it this way, those newspaper readers in the train station a generation ago were creating a community of shared understanding of their city, their country, and their world. In a sort of primitive but vitally important way, a knowledgeable public was being constituted there at Union Station. The present scene, for the most part, depicts private pursuits. The second thing I'd ask you to pay special attention to is the behavior of the cell phone users. They're talking in the O'Hare lounge as if they were at home in their kitchens or at their offices. They're acting as if a public place were private. In a metaphoric sense, our public space is shrinking as their private realm grows. And that's a metaphor I'll return to. I'll also mention a complementary change that you'd see immediately if you compared the newspapers of a generation ago with today's free sheets. What was once thought to be inherently private in the stuff of gossip columns is being treated as public and given the status of news. The emotional and sexual history of Hollywood has moved onto the news pages and squeezed the legislative activity of Washington and Springfield off. One consequence is that basic knowledge of current events stands no chance against the memory-washing flood of entertainment trivia that now sloshes around in the minds of our teens. Who would your kids find easier to name? Members of the Supreme Court or the cast of Friends? I was still in Canada the last time the circulation crisis erupted. It was in the early 1990s. The economy was flat. It was getting very hard and expensive to sell subscriptions. By all appearances, full-time subscribers were becoming occasional readers, and occasionals were losing the habit altogether. So readership institutes were set up at journalism schools across the continent in response. Surveys were commissioned, asking people what they wanted to read, and the look of papers began to change. Inspired by USA Today, they became more colorful, breezier, more succinct. The research that emerged was largely inconclusive about why readership was falling. But researchers turned up lots of activities that correlated with newspaper reading. Newspaper readers were more likely than the average to be voters, to be members of service clubs and other volunteer organizations, to be engaged in public life. As it turned out, business improved in the 90s, so much that most newspaper companies went back to ignoring the problem. The cost of acquiring new subscribers, most effectively through telemarketing, got built into higher ad rates. The problem was passed through to advertisers. Well, the rules governing what circulation could be counted were loosened. to allow newspapers to mask the disappearance of committed subscribers with bulk programs sponsored by hotels and airlines. And some newspapers, including the Chicago Sun-Times, just faked their numbers to dupe advertisers. Circulation crisis roared back with a vengeance after the economic downturn of 2001. Career advertising in newspapers took a big hit that year and never entirely came back to print. Other classified revenue, including autos and private party ads, softened. Free internet platforms such as Craigslist offered both sellers and consumers new options. And advertisers who themselves were having some trouble attracting customers began to look more carefully at what they were getting for their spending. And what they noticed is in some cases they were getting fewer readers and poorer quality readers, more bulk sales and fewer subscribers, and they began to demand discounts or improve circulation performance. But consumers had decided they were tired of telephone solicitation. The number of unlisted numbers soared, and the Do Not Call registry was introduced, hobbling what had been newspapers' most reliable subscription sales tool. Selling newspaper subscriptions to a public determined to deepen its privacy became ever more difficult. Now, perhaps because I've spent much of the last 2 years cleaning up a very public circulation scandal and negotiating $27 million worth of settlements with aggrieved advertisers, I've taken an acute interest in what's really happening to newspaper readership. Let me tell you what my assumptions were and then what I've discovered so far. One, I thought the circulation decline was a relatively recent problem, because with some ups and downs, overall newspaper circulation in America rose from the end of the Second World War until the 1990s. And I thought the problem really had something to do with something that had changed in the sensibilities of the most recent generation of the young. As it turns out, I was wrong on both counts. It appears the nation's affection for newspapers has been waning for nearly 50 years. How do we know? Whether someone is ever going to read newspapers on a regular basis is pretty much decided by the time they're 25. And researchers have been tracking that crucial period in young people's lives for decades. What they've discovered is that the percentage of each annual cohort of 26-year-olds who are newspaper readers has been declining in the U.S. at least since 1960. Every successive age cohort born after the end of the Second World War was a little less likely to become a newspaper reader in adulthood. Now, those post-war cohorts were typically very large, and the erosion in the taste for newspapers was quite slight. So in fact, for some years, the number of newspaper readers was actually growing, while the percentage of those who participated in newspaper readership declined. But when you step back to get a sense of the depth of the decline in the participation rate in generational terms over 40 years, it is dramatic. Roughly 75% of the parents of baby boomers were likely to be regular newspaper readers. Only about 50% of baby boomers are disposed to be regular readers. Only 25% of their children carry on the habit. And the numbers I'm quoting here, they're huge, and they're highly generalized. There are lots of individual counterexamples and counter-trends. There's still lots and lots of news junkies coming along. They're just a smaller proportion of their generation. This is a very broad social trend and one that is not confined to America. As I told you, I first saw it in Canada, same time as it was becoming apparent here. While the decline started a little later in some other Western countries and is a little less steep in some, it's similar to the American experience. I read a story a couple of weeks ago about the Manila Times starting a youth edition, launching their own Red Eye. So apparently, even in the Philippines, they're having trouble attracting young readers. But lest you feel tempted to go home and yell at your kids and their friends, let me remind you that if you were born after 1945, you're part of the problem. This is an issue that's most acute among today's young, but they're not the first to fail to catch the newspaper bug. A very long and profound decline was masked for decades by population growth and rising educational achievement that offset this falling participation rate. Older readers never lost the habit. They're about as voracious as they ever were. But when they die, someone with a 75% probability of being a newspaper reader is being replaced by someone who's only 25% likely to read regularly. So the population-wide readership numbers are starting to swing. Nevertheless, and I take a great deal of consolation in this, they also indicate that this decline, though steady, is very slow. As businesses, news companies still have many profitable years ahead during which to adapt to change. My second assumption was that the decline in newspaper circulation was the result of competition from other news providers, first television, then the internet, and as a result of the time crunch that makes us all so crazy. I mean, we know that evening TV news killed afternoon papers. In 1950, here in Chicago, the average household received 1.3 newspapers. People complain about not being able to share the Sun-Times because it has so few sections. Imagine the quarrels over 0.3 of a newspaper. Many of us grew up with both a morning and evening paper coming to our home. Well, those days are long gone. Household penetration rate of daily newspapers, Monday to Friday newspapers, has fallen below 0.5 copies per household. But is that where young readers have been going all these years, to watch television news? Well, judging by the most recent statistics, apparently not. The average age of primetime TV viewers is 42. That's roughly the median age of the US population. The average age of network news viewers was already in the early 50s by 1991 and is roughly 60 years of age today. CNN viewers range from 59 to 64 as an average age, depending on the show. Only 17% of the under 30s watch network news. The number one reason people give us for canceling their subscriptions is they haven't got time to read. Unopened papers pile up, and customers feel guilty because they never get around to reading them, so they stop buying. I mean, this is the story we were told by researchers in the early 90s, that there's a time famine, so we've got to make the story shorter and simpler, add more pictures, use as much color as you can afford. It was the formula for USA Today. But in fact, our disposable time has actually increased over the last 40 years as a society. We have smaller families. We're retiring earlier. That's added 6 hours a week in the schedule of the average American. So much for the excuse that we don't have time to read the paper, to volunteer, to visit our friends, or to vote. But I know you're thinking, the kids are on the net getting their news. And that was my third assumption. Again, I appear to have been mistaken. When asked in 2002 where they get their news, 82% of young people said television, 38% said newspapers, 13% said radio, 10% said the internet. The demographic data newspapers get from their websites suggests that online audiences are somewhat younger than the print audience, but there's nothing to suggest that young people are generationally disposed to go online for news. Oh, they are going online, just as they are watching television, but it's not for news. So where are they getting their news? This is a question I asked when I gathered my young employees together in my cut rate focus groups. The answer I heard ultimately brought me here. What many of my younger employees said is they didn't much want to pursue the news on the weekend. They wanted to chill out. Their favorite sections of the Sunday paper, the shopping flyers. The news was all bad. Who needed it? Doesn't that rankle? Believe me, I wanted to argue with them. Tell them that a whole free society depends on them being informed. Get off their lazy dust and do their duty as citizens. Buy our newspaper. It's just as well I managed to constrain myself. As I discovered, the numbers suggest the diminished interest in newspapers that we see stretching back over 2 full generations to at least 1960 runs parallel to a diminished interest in the news itself. A 25-year-old in America today is half as interested in the news as a 55-year-old. How's that measured? Only 1/4 of a random sample of 18 to 24-year-olds will agree with the statement, I need to get the news every day. And while I can't give you a statistical measure from my discussions, I heard a lot of that. And this is from people who don't think of themselves as being poorly informed, although most evidence suggests that they are less well informed than previous generations. In fact, a university graduate today has about the same knowledge of current events as a high school graduate 40 years ago. This is a social phenomena that's very hard for many of us to accept. John Calloway said on an interview we did the other day, that the only thing you needed to do to get young people interested in current events was to start talking about a draft. And, and he's got a point. But if you look at the 2002 midterm elections, after 9/11, war in Afghanistan, looming conflict in Iraq, 15% of eligible 18 to 25-year-olds went to the polls. The statistics I've been quoting today have many sources, but one of the best places to start if you're interested in these broad social trends of the last 40 years is Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. Putnam's a professor of public policy at Harvard University and a recent president of the American Political Science Association. The book was published, The Study of the Fraying of Community in America. It was published in the year 2000. The most common response to these numbers is disbelief. I mean, people say to me, kids must be getting their news somewhere. Just not looking in the right places. And I think, yeah, they're getting their news somewhere. They're getting their news about the family from The Simpsons. They're getting their news about Community from South Park. And Jon Stewart is reading them the headlines. That's another thing. If you sense a kind of caustic irony among the young about the values that you hold dear, you're on to something. The anti-authoritarian idealism of the boomers has turned into the anti-authoritarian cynicism of their children. Young people are half as likely as their grandparents to agree with the statement, people are basically honest. The second most common reaction to all this change is intergenerational irritation of the kids today are deadbeats variety. It also tends to make younger people very defensive, as if you were calling their intelligence or their social commitment into question. So lest you feel tempted to go home and complain to the next generation about what this world's coming to, let me remind you that if you're under 65, you're part of the first generation of decline in all of these practices and values. If, like me, you're part of the baby boom generation, the gap between you and your parents' generation in terms of a broad range of elements of social engagement is at least as great as the gap between your generation and your children's. That was my last, though certainly not my final, mistaken assumption. I thought this trend was about newspapers and the news. Apparently, it's not. The news decline across all media tracks the fall in electoral participation rates, slumping membership in political parties, decline in religious affiliation and church-going, even according to some studies, visits with friends and family picnics. Again, this decline shows up on a year-by-year, cohort-by-cohort basis. In our lifetimes, we have witnessed a gradual and profound shrinking of the public sphere. When you look at the extraordinary degree of social change, it's a little easier to understand the polarization of our politics today. The rise of reactionaries who have rightly identified an erosion of traditional values, a thinning and radicalization of progressives who rightly diagnose a broad waning of social idealism. One's response to these developments, I think, is largely a matter of temperament. Neil Postman saw all this 20 years ago and wrote a brilliant, angry book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business, in which he concluded that it was television that was turning our brains and morals to mush. Putnam believes that our present circumstances are the result of many causes. The rise of television and private media are not the least of them. But he also suggests that public engagement may have reached a high point among members of the Great Generation because of the unique and traumatic experiences of their lives. What we see as a society or culture in decline may simply be a return to a level of engagement more typical in human history. From my perspective, the handcart carrying all the people who think we're headed to hell and all those negative trends are never going to stop is a little too crowded. I mean, I actually believe these trends will moderate, and I know that even if only 1/4 of the population has an appetite for news and civic engagement, our duty to gather and disseminate the news remains, as do extraordinary business opportunities. In the meantime, there are some things we can all do if we want to begin to turn things around. It's got to start with the schools. We've got to get back to thinking about our public schools and colleges as places to prepare good citizens, to stop regarding them as merely job training and placement agencies. They have to be more oriented to our public need for informed citizens than the private vocational needs of the students or the private needs of potential employers. What concrete steps can we take? Well, here are a couple of ideas. Many communities are already insisting that students do a minimum number of volunteer hours before they graduate from high school. Studies say these students continue to volunteer at a much higher rate than those who don't have the same experience. On the same model, we can ask our schools to make current events a required element in their curriculum in every grade. Students learn what they have to, and they acquire habits and learning that will last them a lifetime. We can demand that our school boards put the workings of their communities on their agenda. Kids who are faced with examinations about current events will learn, and these lessons will stick. And we have the burden and the opportunity to recognize our own disaffection and cynicism and to get back into the habit of changing the world a little every day. It must seem today as though I held a hand mirror up to Lake Michigan, showed you a couple of waves, and suggested they represented the whole body of water. That wasn't my intention. I don't recommend that we all rise up like mad Irish kings, draw our swords, and try and conquer the tide. But like any self-respecting journalist, I do hope to stimulate a discussion that will spread to a broader public and engage citizens in a dialogue about their community. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Any questions? There's a microphone right there if you want to ask a question. You can go to the microphone alone, it's okay.
We're all on our good behavior, that's why we're not asking.
Wait a minute. While you're getting there, we have to introduce the fighting alderman and the committeeman from the 42nd Ward, Bert Nataris.
Ah,
Along with Judge Mark Ballard. Raise your hand. City Club rules, you got to say who you are, and then you can do whatever you want.
Craig Sieben. Hello, John. Nice to see you again.
hi, Craig. Good to see you.
As you're defining, one of the questions I'd have you consider is you're talking about public goods that we need to promote. How can you, or how have you thought about redefining what we consider as news, which is put into the paper, which actually attracts and draws people? And I'd like your thoughts as to how, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, I think when the state budget crisis was happening, I sent an email to John saying, could you publish what the governor is proposing versus what the Senate, President, and others want? How would we rectify these? And he said, well, that's not really, you weren't able to do it. And I suggested, where am I going to get the data? It would be good to have your reporters report on that. So the challenge and the question is, how do you put things in that promote good activities that people are doing, whether in the schools, volunteerism, and other things? So how do we redefine news to get people interested and excited and enthusiastic about the public good?
It is something that most of us in the newspaper business have been wrestling with our entire careers, and that is you need to follow the community enough to engage them in order to be able to lead, which is to say you have to strike a balance between the tastes and appetites of the moment and the values that you think are significant bedrock and unshakable. And that's why so many newspapers today have a much higher degree of entertainment coverage. They treat as if people actually imagined it were significant. The J-Lo's and I don't know, the Jennifer Astons and the I quite forget who. Because I find it really hard to concentrate on that stuff. However, we do that. We do that to try and engage. We do it to kind of hook them and bring them in, and then when they're there, we give them a cold shower of civics, and hope that they'll come back to us after they dry off. It is an enormous challenge. It is one full of compromises, but certainly. I recognized from the very start that if you put together that ideal newspaper for a public policy group, you would have no readers, including the members of the public policy group, who probably want to know about J-Lo secretly. So those, Craig, you're absolutely right. Those are issues that we grapple with every day. And you know, I mean, you sometimes despair of the small percentage of readers that we do have who you can lead through with various ploys and devices to actually get to the editorial page. That's the case now. It has long been the case. We are as trite as we need to be and as profound as we can be. Morgan.
Yes, how are you, John? First of all, I want to thank you for your effort to reach out to Latino and minority communities over the last few days. That's number one. Number two, I like your ideas about challenging the public schools to use the newspapers, or the newspapers can be a change agent to make children better citizens. You've indicated that your markets are shrinking. How are you going to find new markets, or how are you going to better serve the youth that don't seem to be interested in the traditional newspaper? How are you going to make it live and real for them?
You know, one of the things that this very broad series of changes over the last 40 years suggest is it may well be that we are going to have a significantly smaller audience in the future. It may well be political parties are going to be run by elites in the future. And it may well be that will stimulate a reaction that will bring a broader group back into the reading public and back into active engagement in public life. I don't know. I do know that you can run a very healthy business talking with 25% of a generation. That's a very large, very attractive market. And those are folks who want the news, who want analyses, who want to think through their roles and responsibilities as citizens. We'll continue to find ways to be able to carry on a daily dialogue with them. Yes, sir.
John, my name is Gary Slack. I'm wondering what, if anything, positive did you learn from your red-eye experience?
Thank you, Paul. I'm not sure I need it all. Our effort, which we called Red Streak, was to keep the Tribune, which by my count already had a broadsheet newspaper, 2 television stations, a radio station, and a couple of big websites in the market, to keep them from entering the paid tabloid market. And we succeeded at that. Tribune is now giving away about 90,000 red eyes a day and free. And if they can make a business at that, God bless them. It's not something that we felt that we had the resources or, frankly, the interest to continue. Hello.
Hello, my name's Rachel Goodstein, and I first just want to thank the Sun-Times for the service it has done to the community in its investigative work and the hired trucks investigative report, et cetera, and long may it continue, because I think that that kind of reporting makes people in the community more involved in the public process, because they see that it doesn't necessarily have to be business as usual. I would also like to suggest perhaps a way of getting younger people, particularly high school and junior high school age kids involved, is to cover the news in their community. People will read the papers if they really get consistent coverage of things like the crisis in Englewood, or what goes on in their parks or doesn't go on in their parks, the issues that engage kids. I was lucky I had parents who were civically involved, and they brought me along. And I can also tell you that you do have to get people, I agree that you have to get people started young, but I think you do that by figuring it out, what those public issues are, and then reporting on them. and I wish you continued good luck.
No, I certainly agree, and thank you for that. I appreciate that, and certainly the best indicator for success in journalism today is local. Local news is withstanding these changes far better than national or regional news. And we're glad about that because we are an unapologetically, at the Chicago Sun-Times, unapologetically local paper, and our suburban papers as well. They are very much a reflection of what's going on in their communities. And we've committed ourselves to deepening that connection on a local basis. I agree with you. That's how we can be most local, most effective and most useful to people, while at the same time, pursuing our best business practices. Sir.
John, my name is Reuben Headland. Following up on that, has the decline in readership of newspapers also affected suburban newspapers and community newspapers to the same extent?
To a slightly lesser extent. Big city papers are more vulnerable. Regional papers are more vulnerable. Suburban newspapers and local weeklies are a little less so. But the broader trend over the whole, say, 40-year period suggests an erosion in all forms of newspaper readership and, as I said, in interest in the news, in engagement.
John, my name's Michael Kraus. I'm curious what you think of the Sun-Times as a brand. I grew up with it here. It's a great brand. Where do you think it's heading? And I didn't hear you talk about the possibility of an LBO. What do you think?
I think that I'll leave that alone. But I really do believe in the... Well, I grew up in Toronto. It was the Liquor Board of Ontario. I think that the Sun-Times is a great brand, which is one of the reasons that we have called the whole group of newspapers the Sun-Times News Group, not the newspaper group, by the way, but the news group. We're thinking of ourselves as a news company, but we think that what is vital to that brand, what is really core to it, is the investigative work, and so I feel enormously proud of the work that our people have done over the last couple of years to restore, the real vitality of the Sun-Times brand in this market.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Ellie Wilder. I'm a freelance photojournalist. I remember when I wanted to find out what was happening in the world or in my city, you went to the newspaper. That was your first way of finding out who won the election. And now when I pick up the newspaper, it seems to me a great deal is old news, because through technology, we're getting the news to TV, and then you're printing it out. And so when I wake up in the morning and I open up the newspaper, because I still have that habit, I say, wait a minute, I know this, and I know that. How can the newspaper better serve us rather than rereading information that we already know to get us informed about the world around us?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and again, it's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about in newsrooms. One of the reasons that there is old news on the front of newspapers is that not everybody uses all of the newspaper as a way to get new news. They use it to confirm what they've heard elsewhere. They use it to deepen their understanding of what they've heard elsewhere. And newspapers are funny. People, early on, I think, realizing when you get 500 or 600 phone calls because you'd gotten a clue to a crossword wrong, and basically you have 500 or 600 people telling you that the only reason they bought your newspaper was for the crossword, you really had to recognize that newspaper readerships are a coalition of readerships. There aren't people there for a single reason. There are many, many reasons, and we try and address all of them. Where I see the news business rather than the newspaper business going, I see the news business as being one that has many channels, and where it's possible to buy a subscription to the Sun-Times, to the Sun-Times news group, get a print product, but also simultaneously have access to a web product that gives you absolutely updated, constantly updated material. And to have that sent to your telephone, to your whatever you're using, your iPod. I think that's where things are going in the future. And believe me, I'd be happy to hasten anything that eliminates the need for printing plants and newsprint, especially newsprint bought in Canadian dollars, which all newsprint is these days. And the Canadian dollar has risen by about 30% against the US dollar in the last couple of years. And that's been giving us fits as we try and put the budgets together. Yes, sir.
In view of the shrinking classified ad base and advertising in general, how does the paper continue to afford a suitable news gathering staff?
It's a good question, and the nightmare that we had some time ago was that this migration of revenue was going to outrun, our ability to invent new ways of earning money, and we weren't going to be able to afford the reporting, which is fundamental to what we do. Many newspapers, ours included, have created their own online classified businesses, and so money that's moving out of print we're catching it as it drops out of the newspaper. That really is the principal strategy. And the other things we're doing is just try to do what we do less expensively. We're in the process of a consolidation of 5 of our businesses here in Chicago, and we believe that we'll be able to produce newspapers significantly less expensively when we're done. So we're doing what everybody does. When your business case needs to change, you go out and you take steps to change it.
Okay. Big round of applause. Before we give Mr. Cruickshank the kind of gifts that are worthy of a man who takes people out to focus groups and gives them a sandwich and a brownie, they'll be right on par with that. Jay unbelievably missed a few people. The Fighting Alderman of the 39th Ward, Margaret Lorino. And the committeeman, I think you know that guy, Randy Barnett. Two more, and we got our corporate sponsor, the A's. American Airlines, Bill Hood. And now it's ATTSBC. We could spell either way. Kerry Heitman and Bill Gaynor. Now, Mr. Cruickshank, an official City Club mug. In case things go bad, you could always stand in front of that Trump Tower and get donations. That was not a bad one, Hule. I was thinking about that one. The history of the City Club, written by a former employee, Mr. Mariner, and 1-year membership. And now, as profits keep going up, you could pony up. Go out and vote tomorrow. Judge Marina's left. She's probably going to sleep. She's going to have to work her precinct tomorrow. Thank you all for coming. Adjourned.